The war of words continues between the United States and North Korea over Pyongyang's nuclear program. The US appears to have currently adopted the policy of pressing North Korea to abandon its threats through sanctions. Pyongyang had already described any move to impose sanctions against it as an act of war. It had also warned that sanctions can never stop its plans to promote its defense capabilities. Many believe Washington's persistence to press North Korea through sanctions is a sign of its inability or unwillingness to go for the military option as it had so far threatened to do.
Now, when you look at the way Trump threatens North Korea and Iran, I think you have to take that in the tone of his negotiating positions. Remember, when it came time where he could have scrapped the deal with Iran, he did not. He simply passed it on to the Congress. And I think that he wants to take this tough position, but he is fundamentally opposed to new wars. And the idea that he is going to engage in a war with North Korea, which everybody knows would be totally insane. Mr. Lavrov just yesterday in his Christmas Day interview said no one in their right mind would want a war in the Korean Peninsula, including most people in America.
Other signs have appeared that may suggest both sides may be interested in a peaceful resolution for the current crisis in the Korean Peninsula. Russia has announced that it is ready to mediate between Washington and Pyongyang if the two sides are willing for it to play such a role. This has been implicitly welcomed by the US State Department, with one spokesperson emphasizing that Pyongyang can choose a different path and return to credible negotiations. Analysts believe the idea to open a channel between Washington and Pyongyang to talk to each other has been in the pipeline for a while now.
It's been in the works for several weeks, over a month. The top Russian experts on North Korea, Georgy Talaraya and Art Lukin, were in Washington and in New York 2 weeks ago. Before that, the Russians had a delegation in North Korea and came back and said the North Koreans were ready to talk without preconditions. And as you know, then Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State Tillerson, said that the U.S. was ready to talk without preconditions. I think the offer made by Foreign Minister Lavrov was clearly not out of the blue. It was done on the basis of an understanding that has been evolving between Russia, China, President Trump and Rex Tillerson, and South Korea, and through negotiations with North Korea by the Russians and by the Chinese.
Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has criticized what he has described as Washington's aggressive rhetoric for the current crisis in the Korean Peninsula. Analysts believe that adopting an aggressive rhetoric is part of the strategy of US President Donald Trump, a strategy in which the option to sit at the negotiating table to avoid unnecessary costs is perfectly embedded.
He's been very belligerent in his language towards North Korea. But remember that this is Trump's way. His book about his negotiating tactics is always that you take an extremely tough pose and then you negotiate. All they're asking is that there be a pause in North Korea's testing. There actually was a bit of a pause for over a month and a half before the last test, but that's because the U.S. continued its major military exercises around North Korea, which were very threatening. And as I'm sure you also know, South Korea has now called on the United States to postpone its scheduled military exercises until after the Olympics in mid-March. So I'm certain the U.S. will do that, and this creates a general environment in which the potential for stepping forward is sure.
Many may be wishing to see an end to the hysteria around what is feared to become the worst nuclear war ever between North Korea and the US. To the same effect, the costs for both countries to engage in such a war may be too high to afford. Dialogue is therefore the path the world wants Washington and Pyongyang to adopt to avoid a catastrophe that could send shockwaves throughout the world.